Trump attacks. Jasmine Crockett instantly backfires as she ignites a national movement. He said it with a smile. A threat. A literal threat aimed at a sitting member of Congress. Broadcasted on live national television. And he said it like he was ordering a drink. Maybe it's your turn to get locked up. That line didn't just fall flat. It didn't just echo. It detonated. 1 second, the crowd was roaring, half cheering, half booing, the usual chaos that follows Donald Trump anywhere he speaks. The next second, the air went razor sharp. Even the moderator flinched. Some laughed awkwardly. Others looked around, unsure if they'd just misheard the former president. But Jasmine Crockett heard it clearly. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't back down. She sat up straighter in her chair. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes stayed locked on him. And, when she finally spoke, her words cracked like thunder across that televised stage. You just threatened to jail a sitting congresswoman on live television for doing her job. What came next? It wasn't spin. It wasn't a clapback. It was history. This wasn't just another Trump moment. This wasn't a gaffe. This wasn't one of those things he says, and people laugh off with a, "That's just Donald being Donald." This was a direct threat spoken from a former head of state to a current elected official because she dared to call him out. And the country heard it. All of it. Let's rewind. Tulsa, Oklahoma. A town hall turned televised firestorm. The crowd was rowdy. Trump's base never shows up half-hearted. They were waving flags, holding up their phones, chanting their old slogans like sacred hymns. Everything about the night felt like déjà vu. Until it didn't. 2 seats down from Trump sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, sharp composed and wearing her resistance-like armor. She was not there to play it safe. The producers knew that. What they didn't know was that she would walk into that room and detonate the illusion that Donald Trump was untouchable. The moment began like any other media-engineered confrontation. A moderator, Congressman Reynolds, looked down at his notes and raised the question. Congresswoman Crockett, do you believe the former president's indictments compromise his ability to lead? She didn't miss a beat. No rehearsed sighs, no hedging. I believe this man has abused power, avoided accountability, and now pretends like he's the victim. Let's stop pretending this is normal. Boom. Gasps, cheers, groans. The air changed. Trump leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Smug. Oh, please, he sneered. You've been trying to get me locked up since day one. Maybe it's your turn to get locked up. How about that? The room went silent for a beat too long. You know that feeling when the mask slips, when the show suddenly isn't a show anymore? That was it. And Jasmine, she met the moment. With no script, no camera crew in her ear. Just instinct. This is the kind of thing dictators say when they can't handle dissent. You don't scare me, and you sure don't silence me. The internet exploded before the producers could even cut to commercial. Phones whipped out. Clips were already uploading to TikTok and Instagram before the moderator tried to regain control. Hashtags were born in real time. Stand with Crockett, Shonda protect black women, silencing dissent. By the time Trump leaned back, visibly rattled, the narrative had left the building and taken flight. Jasmine Crockett had just exposed something fundamental. Not just about Donald Trump, but about the entire machine that allows threats like that to pass without consequence. Because, let's be honest, if a former president can publicly threaten a congresswoman on stage and still be treated like a serious candidate, then something is broken. And Jasmine didn't just call it broken, she dragged it into the light. Backstage, a storm was brewing. One of Jasmine's aides rushed to her as the producers cut to commercial. "You okay? I'm speaking tonight," she said. "No waiting." The aide blinked. "You sure I'm not letting that stand? Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Meanwhile, Trump's team scrambled to contain the fire. Whispers to reporters. It was a joke. Don't make this bigger than it is. She's overreacting. But it was already too late. The video clip spread like wildfire. The audio was crystal clear. The tone wasn't ambiguous. The threat wasn't subtle. It was a man who had once held the nuclear codes, suggesting that maybe a black woman in Congress should be in jail for challenging him. And America heard it. From New York to Birmingham to Albuquerque, people were talking. In a kitchen in Dallas, an elderly teacher told her granddaughter, "You know why she didn't flinch? Because she's dealt with this kind of thing since she was probably 12. In a high school auditorium in Oakland, a student played the clip for his government class. If this happened in another country, he said we'd call it authoritarianism. In an all-night diner in Columbus, a waitress muttered to her coworker, "He can't actually jail her, right?" Her coworker replied, "That's not the point. He wants people to believe he can, and that's the danger. Not just in the words, but in the performance of power." Trump wasn't just reacting. He was asserting dominance, asserting fear. But he chose the wrong woman. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to be dominated. She wasn't there to bow, or blink, or smile politely while being politically manslaughtered on camera. She was there to speak. And in the face of a threat designed to make her smaller, she got louder, sharper, stronger. That night, she held a press conference. No handlers, no teleprompters, just a podium, a flag, and a truth that wouldn't wait. Tonight, I was threatened on live television by a man who once held the highest office in this country. And I need you to understand, it wasn't just about me. That threat was meant to scare every woman who dares to challenge him. Every community that refuses to bow down to abuse. I will not be intimidated. I will not apologize for doing my job. And I will not let anyone, no matter how powerful they think they are, rewrite what accountability looks like. The feed cut in and out. But the message came through crystal clear. By morning, the clip had reached 10 million views. Not through PR agencies or mainstream press, but through people. Real people. Posting. Sharing. Whispering, then shouting. Because Jasmine didn't just respond. She flipped the script. This wasn't about one insult. This was about a system. A system where speaking truth to power gets you labeled angry radical or worse threatened. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't having it. Not then. Not now. Because sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to flinch. And when that person speaks, the rest of us finally realize we don't have to stay silent either. The moment Jasmine Crockett refused to flinch, something shifted not just in the room, not just in that night's headlines, but in the pulse of a nation that had grown far too comfortable watching power flex without consequence. When she said, "I will not let anyone rewrite what accountability looks like," it wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a declaration. And the declaration had already left the podium. It was now alive in group chats and live stream breakdowns, in whispered conversations at work, in tweets that said simply, "She said what needed to be said." But with attention comes escalation. And the attention was volcanic. Overnight, Jasmine's phone buzzed relentlessly. Not from media giants, not yet, but from the people. Nurses, students, moms, veterans, and pastors, most of whom she had never met, but who saw in her something urgent, representation with a backbone. Still in Tulsa, Jasmine sat on the edge of her hotel bed at 4:00 a.m. heels, off eyes bloodshot, fielding messages from her team. Her aide Theo paced the room, juggling two phones, occasionally muttering under his breath about how MSNBC was trying to book her on 3 shows in a row. "They want you to speak before sunrise," he said. MSNBC? CNN. Even Roland's people called. Jasmine didn't look up from her phone. "I'm not going to do a victory lap on cable news, like it's gossip. This isn't about me. It's about what happens when people in power are allowed to get away with this." Theo stopped pacing. "Then call it what it is. Name it." She stood, walked to the mirror, adjusted the same black blazer she wore on stage the night before. "I will, but not for the clicks. For the people who can't go live on CNN when they're being threatened." At that very moment, someone in California uploaded a split-screen TikTok comparing Jasmine's calm stare to other moments when Trump faced powerful women, April, Ryan Yamiche, Alcindor, Maxine Waters. The pattern was impossible to miss. Every time a black woman challenged him, he lashed out not with arguments, but with mockery, with threats. The video racked up hundreds of thousands of views before dawn. Meanwhile, Trump's team scrambled to explain the unexplainable. On conservative media, spin masters called it a joke, misunderstood, taken out of context. But the internet is allergic to gaslighting when the receipts are that obvious. The footage was crystal clear, the audio untouched, and the words unmistakable. Maybe it's your turn to get locked up. That wasn't a joke. That was intimidation. And America knew it. At a community center in Dallas, a retired schoolteacher named Marianne Fields watched the clip on her tablet over breakfast with her granddaughter. You know why she didn't flinch, Marianne said. Because she's had men try that her whole life. Her granddaughter blinked. He can't actually arrest her, though. Right? Marianne didn't miss a beat. Baby, it ain't about what he can do. It's about what he wants people to believe he can do. Back in Tulsa, Jasmine was setting up for a second press conference. No fancy set. No flashing banners. Just 2 flags, a step-and-repeat backdrop from her campaign, and a mic stand adjusted by a sleep-deprived intern. Reporters began filing in, some skeptical, some breathless. One asked bluntly, "Are you afraid of retaliation?" Jasmine smiled, but there was no softness in her voice. "I'm not afraid of speaking the truth. I'm afraid of what happens if we don't." And then she stepped up. Not with bluster, not with spin, but with a message. Last night I was threatened on live television by a man who once held the highest office in this country. And I need you to understand, this isn't just about me. That threat was meant to scare every woman who dares to challenge him, every community that refuses to bow to abuse. She paused, let the silence breathe. I will not be intimidated. I will not apologize for doing my job. And I will not be silent, because silence is how systems like this stay standing. Reporters scribbled furiously. Microphones leaned in closer. And while all this happened, something else stirred. Across college campuses, young women, many of them black, brown, or first generation, watched her in real time. In lecture halls, dorm rooms, and campus libraries, they saw a version of themselves, not just on the defensive, but building offense. In Baltimore, a high school debate team played Jasmine's town hall clip as part of their morning warm-up. Their coach, a soft-spoken veteran named Ms. Lewis, turned to the room after the clip ended and asked, "What did you hear?" One student stood up. She didn't just answer him. She claimed space. She flipped the threat. Exactly. And that flipping the turning of a moment of danger into a moment of transformation was the beginning of something even bigger. That same day, Jasmine's press team received an unexpected email. It was from a civil rights organizer out of Houston named Dr. Dion Hardwick. He didn't ask for a photo op. He didn't offer a donation. He wrote simply, "Power concedes nothing without demand. You made a demand last night. The question is, will we back it up?" That question rang in Jasmine's ears long after the press conference ended. She wasn't interested in trending. She was interested in building something that could outlive the noise. Something that could push back against the pattern, the mocking, the belittling, the threats, the silencing. So she called a meeting. Not with lobbyists, not with media consultants. She met with organizers, students, lawyers, faith leaders, survivors of political intimidation. And out of those conversations came something real. A new initiative. A new line in the sand. The Unmuted Project. Its mission was simple: no one speaks alone. Not anymore. It would offer legal resources, media support, mental health access, and training for public servants, activists, and everyday citizens facing retaliation for using their voice. Within 72 hours, the project had a name, a website, and a viral announcement video. In it, Jasmine looked straight into the lens and said, "They tried to threaten me silent. So, I'm building a platform so we all can speak louder." The video exploded. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't produced by a Hollywood studio. It was raw, honest, and urgent. And maybe that's why it worked. Because Jasmine wasn't just responding anymore. She was organizing. And power was watching. Nervously. At a fundraiser in South Carolina, Trump was asked about the incident. He waved it off with the usual smirk. She's trying to make a name for herself? I made her famous. But even his base didn't laugh as loudly. Because something was different this time. He had underestimated not just Jasmine Crockett, but the hunger in the country for anyone willing to stand up to the bully and call the moment what it was: a threat, a warning, a line we cannot afford to cross again. And Jasmine wasn't just standing. She was pushing. And America was starting to push with her. What began as a threat designed to shut her down had done the opposite. It set her movement in motion. By the time Jasmine Crockett walked off stage after launching the Unmuted project, the ripples of her refusal to be silent were already crashing through America's political terrain. And power was beginning to feel the pressure. Cable news panels, student unions, even a few stunned conservative columnists admitted it. This wasn't just about a flashpoint at a town hall. This was about what came after the flash, when someone picks up the ashes and starts to build. Jasmine had done just that, and the heat was climbing. She didn't slow down. Days after her second press conference, Jasmine was on the road. Not to raise money, not to shake hands with donors, but to sit with the very people most often ignored by the system. Her team rented a modest auditorium in South Dallas, flickering lights, uneven folding chairs, an ancient vending machine in the corner humming like it might combust. It didn't matter. She didn't come for aesthetics. She came for the truth. The room filled quickly: local teachers, single moms, student organizers, retired veterans. Some came in suits, some in hoodies. All of them came with questions. No cameras, no scripts, just Jasmine and a mic. She opened with what would become her rallying cry: I didn't come here to trade sound bites. I came here to tell the truth. And people listened. She talked about the culture of intimidation that had built itself into the American political architecture. How power had learned not just to suppress, but to mock, to isolate, to label truth tellers as angry, radical, unhinged. But here's the thing, she said. Silence never kept us safe. Silence never got us justice. Silence never protected our daughters. Applause erupted, not orchestrated, but instinctual. The next question came from a teenage boy in the back row. Nervous, but clear. Do you think anything's actually going to change? She didn't dodge. I think change doesn't happen when one person speaks. It happens when enough people decide they're done staying quiet. That answer traveled across social media, across radio, across text threads between organizers. Because it wasn't rhetoric. It was a challenge. And Jasmine wasn't just issuing challenges, she was flipping policy. Within a week, she and her team had drafted legislation, the Elected Officials Protection Act. A bill designed to criminalize politically motivated threats made by public servants against their colleagues. No loopholes, no vague phrasing, just teeth. Of course there was blowback. Fox News called it the free speech police. Conservative think tanks spun it as dangerously vague while ignoring how precise the bill actually was. Trump's surrogates doubled down, claiming Jasmine was weaponizing victimhood. But the backlash wasn't landing. Not like it used to. Because the country had seen the footage. They'd watched her not just endure the threat, but stand taller because of it. Meanwhile, Jasmine kept moving. At a soul food spot in Tulsa, she sat across from Dr. Dion Hardwick, a civil rights organizer, old enough to remember when speaking out meant losing your job, your safety, sometimes your life. You've got their attention, he said, stirring his tea. You ready for what comes with that? I didn't ask for this fight, Jasmine replied, but I'm not leaving it. Hardwick smiled. They're not used to this kind of heat. She knew he was right, and the heat was spreading. A few blocks away, a young server at the same restaurant tapped her shoulder. Can I hug you? Jasmine stood. Of course. It lasted only 4 seconds. But in those seconds, that girl's shoulders relaxed. Her breath slowed. Jasmine held her just a second longer and whispered, "Keep using your voice, even when they don't want to hear it." In Arizona, an independent voter named Susan Morelli watched the clip of that moment. She had voted Republican most of her life, but something was shifting. She paused, the video stared at the screen, and whispered, "He crossed the line." She wasn't alone. Editorial boards began to shift tone, not just condemning Trump's words, but highlighting the constitutional implications. Legal scholars weighed in. The phrase political intimidation was no longer an abstract idea. It was headline news. Back in Washington, Jasmine's office was flooded with letters. Not emails, actual mail, stacked in boxes. Some hostile, most grateful. One note written in blue ink on ruled notebook paper read, "Thank you for speaking. I'm a teacher. I've been told to tone it down every time I ask hard questions. You made me feel seen." She folded that one carefully, put it in her bag. "Keep this," she told Theo. And still, she kept moving. In a Baltimore community center, Jasmine sat with locals. No press, no stage. Just listening. One woman, Brenda, a retired librarian, told a story about standing up to a school board trying to ban Toni Morrison's books. "They called me emotional. Like that's a crime." Jasmine nodded. "They try to punish the delivery so they can ignore the message." A few heads nodded. A teenage boy in a hoodie asked her quietly, "You think your speech changed anything?" She leaned forward. "I think change happens when we don't let them twist our truth into noise." Somewhere across the country, Trump kept ranting at rallies. "They're silencing us," he screamed. "We are the victims." But even his crowd was beginning to hesitate, glancing around before clapping. The air of invincibility. It was cracking. At Howard University, a media ethics professor paused his lecture to play Jasmine's town hall moment. This, he told his students, is what leadership under pressure looks like. She didn't wait to be defined. She defined the moment. And perhaps most striking of all, Theo, back at the campaign's HQ, stared at the donation dashboard. Numbers had spiked 320% in 48 hours. Not from billionaires, but from nurses in Topeka, students in Oakland, teachers in Jackson. "She's breaking through," he whispered. "And they know it." Jasmine, meanwhile, was doing what she always had, sitting with people, listening, turning moments into movements, because she knew the attention wouldn't last. But the fire, that could, if she kept stoking it with truth, and if others kept catching the flame. And catch it they did. That flame Jasmine had sparked, ignited not from spectacle, but from standing firm, was spreading faster than even she had anticipated. What began with a pointed question and an unapologetic answer now moved like heat through the arteries of a restless nation. From Oakland to Omaha, from college campuses to kitchen tables, her voice was no longer just a message. It had become a matchstick. Jasmine had seen movements catch fire before, but this time she was the flame. She flew back to D.C. on a red-eye flight that landed just after sunrise. No entourage, no fanfare, just a cracked phone screen, a duffel bag, and the weight of a country's expectation on her shoulders. Theo met her at the terminal, holding 2 coffees and an iPad glowing with numbers. "You're up 10 points among independents," he said without even saying good morning. "And we're polling higher in 3 states you've never even campaigned in." Jasmine didn't blink. "Polls don't change people's lives, Theo. We're not trending just to trend. We have to do something with it." And that's exactly what she intended to do. The moment her boots hit Capitol Hill, whispers followed. Some colleagues offered polite nods, others avoided her eyes entirely. A few allies gave shoulder squeezes or quick affirmations, but most weren't sure what to do with her, not because she was wrong, but because she'd said out loud what too many had silently endured. Congressman Frank Waller of Michigan Silverbeard, always stoic, caught her in the hallway. "That speech took guts," he said. "But you know what this place does to people who show guts." You think I've just painted a bigger target on my back? Jasmine asked. He leaned in. You always had one. You just made it visible. Back in her office, letters kept piling in. One caught her eye. It was from a teenage girl in Omaha. Crayon handwriting. Thank you for not being quiet. I want to be like you. Jasmine held the letter close for a moment, then added it to the growing box labeled, Hold on to this. That afternoon, she convened a private roundtable. Not for donors, not for headlines, just community voices in a basement in Baltimore. Plastic chairs, lukewarm coffee, honest talk. A retired school librarian named Brenda recounted how she'd been shouted down for opposing a local book ban. They didn't come at my facts. They came at my tone, she said. They always make the tone the problem. Jasmine nodded. Because if they can't silence what you say, they'll try to silence how you say it. Heads nodded. And then a teenage boy near the back asked, But do you think any of this actually matters? Jasmine didn't hesitate. Change doesn't come when one voice rises. It comes when enough of us refuse to stay quiet. The moment landed. Not loud, but deep. Elsewhere, Trump was doubling down. At a rally in Arkansas, he smirked and played to the crowd. She tried to play the victim. But we're the real victims, right? Some people clapped. Fewer than usual. Even in red states, some of the applause now came with hesitation. Even loyalists were looking sideways before raising their hands. Back in Washington, political commentators were sharpening their knives, but not at Jasmine. The threat wasn't just a soundbite anymore. It had become a case study. In high school debate clubs, civics teachers were playing the clip and asking, Is this what democracy should look like? At Howard University, Professor Glenn Reese had turned Jasmine's press conference into a class assignment. She didn't just survive the moment he told students, she reframed it. That's power. But it wasn't just symbolic. Jasmine's team finalized the language of the Elected Officials Protection Act and set a date to file it. And when they didn't do it quietly. They stood on the Capitol steps, Jasmine flanked by 5 colleagues, 3 Democrats, 1 Republican, 1 Independent. A visible coalition. No ambiguity. Jasmine stepped to the mic. We're not passing this for ourselves. We're passing it. So the next person who speaks truth to power won't have to wonder if it'll cost them their safety or their freedom. Back in the crowd, Thea whispered to a staffer. She just flipped the entire narrative in real time. And he was right. The media no longer framed this as Crockett versus Trump. It had become something more fundamental. A referendum on political bullying, authoritarian tactics, and the fragile line between power and abuse. At a Fox News segment, a visibly rattled anchor tried to spin the story. Maybe it was inappropriate, but wasn't she asking for it with that tone? But that line didn't land anymore, because people had seen it too many times. The mockery, the threats, the coded language. This time, they were paying attention to the pattern and Jasmine. She wasn't waiting for approval. She kept organizing. In a small Texas town, she walked into a community center with duct-taped podiums and mismatched chairs. No press. Just 50 locals. Teachers, retirees, students waiting quietly. She didn't give a speech. She asked a question. When was the last time you felt heard? The room cracked open. People talked about city council meetings where their questions got cut short. About school boards that ignored parent concerns. About how speaking up had always come with a cost. Jasmine didn't preach. She listened. And by listening, she reminded them that their voices mattered not just in voting booths, but in conversations in boardrooms, in classrooms, in kitchens. By the end, one teenager in a jean jacket stood up and said, "You speak like my mom does when no one's listening to her. But people have to listen to you now." Jasmine smiled but shook her head. They don't have to listen to me. They choose to. And that choice? It starts with you choosing to speak anyway. Her team later launched the Unmuted Project, a support network for organizers, educators, and public servants facing threats. Legal help, media training, mental health support. Real tools for a real fight. Billboards went up in Detroit, Oakland, and Phoenix. Your voice isn't a threat. It's a right. Donations surged again, not from political machines, but from everyday people who had never sent a dollar to a candidate in their lives. Even some critics began to fold. A conservative talk radio host in Nashville, who had mocked her after the town hall, issued a rare on-air retraction. I didn't get it before. I do now. That hearing changed things. And yes, there was a hearing. A House Oversight Committee invitation landed in her inbox with a simple subject line, request for testimony on political retaliation. Theo handed it to her without saying a word. She read it, then said, "They're not just asking me to speak, they're asking me to define what happens next." He nodded. "Then let's make it count." The chamber was packed, the air thick with expectation. Jasmine stepped to the microphone. No tremble, no apology. She said, "I want you to imagine a workplace where a colleague can say, 'Maybe we lock her up,' and nothing happens. No consequence, no rebuke, just a smirk. Then I want you to ask, what if it wasn't me? What if it was someone with no platform, no backup? Would we still be pretending it was a joke?" Silence. Some clapped. Some winced. But all of them heard it. And when Jasmine lifted a stack of hate mail sent to her office, emails, letters, threats, no one could call it exaggeration anymore. "This is the cost of telling the truth," she said. "And if we allow it to become normal, we are not preserving democracy. We are surrendering it." The story was no longer about what Trump said. It was about what Jasmine did with it. And in doing so, she didn't just fight back, she changed the terms of the fight entirely. By the time Jasmine stepped off that congressional floor, her words still echoing in the marble halls, it was clear she hadn't just testified. She had set a new precedent. No longer was the narrative about Trump's threat, it was about Jasmine's answer. Her clarity. Her calm under fire. Her refusal to shrink. And the country was watching. Outside the hearing room, there was no shouting. No wild applause. Just a heavy silence, the kind that follows a moment so undeniable, even your enemies stop to breathe. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted questions. Jasmine didn't stop. Didn't flinch. She made her way to the sidewalk where a quiet man in a wheelchair held up a handwritten sign. "Your voice helped me find mine." She walked straight to him, bent down, and shook his hand. "Keep using it," she said, "even when they don't want you to." The photo of that moment would become one of the most widely shared images of the year. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Jasmine wasn't a political brand. She was a lightning rod for something that couldn't be scripted dignity under pressure. The next morning, the headlines weren't about Trump's counterattack. They were about her. Crockett redefines the fight for political integrity, read The Washington Post. This was her moment, and she didn't blink, wrote a student-run editorial from the University of Michigan. Donations poured in again, but this time the notes attached to them told the real story. "I don't agree with your policies, but I respect how you held your ground. You reminded my daughter what courage looks like. Thank you for standing tall. We see you." And inside the Capitol, things were shifting. Whispers turned into quiet conversations. Lawmakers who'd once avoided her in elevators were now asking to co-sponsor the Elected Officials Protection Act. Some out of principle, others out of self-preservation. But either way, the tide was moving. Still, Jasmine didn't mistake momentum for victory. Later that week, in a closed-door meeting with Theo, she leaned over the edge of her desk, voice low and tight. "This isn't a win," she said. "It's a warning shot. If we don't hold the line here, we lose the whole map." Theo nodded. "Then we keep walking." And walk they did. 3 weeks later, she flew to Durham, North Carolina, not because it was on the schedule, but because an old community center had sent a voicemail. No press, no big promises, just a request from a retired school lunch manager named Gerald McCoon. "The folks here need to see someone who doesn't blink." She showed up, no fanfare, no entourage, just her a mic stand patched with duct tape and 50 folding chairs. Inside were people who had no idea she'd be there until they walked through the door. She didn't give a speech. She asked a question. When was the last time you felt heard? For 90 minutes, people poured out their stories. A woman who'd been kicked out of a school board meeting for demanding clean water. A warehouse worker who lost his job after trying to unionize. A teenage boy whose mother was fired for reporting sexual harassment at her job. And when they were done, Jasmine said, "I get it. I've lived it. But I also know this silence doesn't protect you. It just makes the lies louder." Later that evening, she sat in the back of a rented sedan, heading to the airport, scrolling through phone clips students had posted online from her earlier visit to Texas Southern. Raw, shaky footage. One video, just 47 seconds long, showed her saying, "They tried to silence me. I made them listen louder." The clip had over 4.3 million views. Theo leaned over and grinned. "You see what you did?" She didn't look up from her phone. "I see what they did," she said. "I just said what needed to be said when it counted." Across the country, the impact deepened. A former public defender in Ohio sent her a message. "My daughter didn't want to vote. She watched you today. Now she's registering." Cable anchors who had once skipped over her were now leading segments with her name. And this time, it wasn't just about one moment. It was about what that moment had become. Her team launched the Unmuted Project, officially turning it from a support slogan into a real national network. Legal help for threatened educators. Media training for underfunded organizers. Mental health resources for local candidates who'd been harassed into silence. No fluff, just tools. A week later, their first billboard went up outside Detroit. White background, black text. "Your voice isn't a threat. It's a right." And small in the bottom corner, the Unmuted Project. The donations that came in weren't large, but they were constant. Under $10 gifts from first-time givers in rural Idaho, inner-city Chicago college towns, and Georgia. Theo burst into her office holding a spreadsheet. "We've added over 2,000 new donors in the last 58 hours. Most of them under 30. Jasmine looked up from a notepad where she was sketching ideas for the next town hall. "It's not about me anymore," she said softly. Theo smiled. It never really was. Even her critics, some of them anyway, were beginning to quiet down. A Nashville talk radio host who had mocked her now issued a correction on air. "I didn't get it," he admitted. "But I watched the full hearing, and I was wrong. Not everyone changed their tune. Some still scoffed, still deflected, still dismissed her as dramatic or divisive. That was fine." Jasmine didn't need unanimous applause. She needed movement. In her next floor speech in Congress, she didn't even mention Trump by name. "We keep making heroes out of those who abuse power," she said, "and noise out of those who resist it." Let me be clear. Speaking truth isn't noise. It's necessary. And I'll keep speaking until that no longer needs explaining. Back in Shreveport, her mother Marietta watched the speech from her living room. Same armchair, same crocheted blanket draped over the side. She didn't clap. She just whispered, "That's my baby." Then she turned off the TV and sat in silence, smiling. Across the country, students in the schools Jasmine had visited began forming local chapters of the Unmuted Project. They weren't asking for permission. They were organizing workshops, hosting storytelling nights, starting community defense groups. At one event in Milwaukee, a 16-year-old girl named Asha stood up during a panel and said, "I used to be scared to talk about the things I saw in my neighborhood. Not anymore. Because now I know speaking doesn't make me weak. It makes me real." Jasmine saw the clip on her phone while writing to yet another town hall. She watched it twice. Then again. She didn't cry, but she smiled in a way that said everything. Theo glanced over. "You see what's happening?" She nodded. "They're not just listening, they're answering." And with that, she opened her phone, tapped a blank note, and wrote 3 words. "Keep the pressure." Because Jasmine knew better than anyone, when power feels pressure, it fights back harder. And the next punch wasn't far behind. The punch came 3 days later. Jasmine was standing in the middle of a cramped TV studio in Chicago. Light's hot makeup long since faded when Theo handed her the phone. No words, just the screen. Headline: Trump attacks Crockett. Again calls her a national disgrace at Ohio rally. She scanned the transcript. The same old lines, the same veiled threats, the same mockery masked as bravado. But this time he was angrier, less calculated, more reactive. She's no hero, Trump had barked to a fired-up crowd. She's a loudmouth who got lucky. She's not brave, she's dangerous. And if I'm elected again, she'll learn what consequences really look like. There it was. The punch. Direct, personal, and unmistakably loaded. The internet exploded again. Within an hour, hashtags started flying. Stand with Crockett. Unmuted and unshaken. Not afraid. Jasmine didn't react immediately. She finished the segment talking about housing reform like nothing had happened. Calm, composed, unbothered. But the moment the cameras turned off, she sat in the dressing room and stared at the wall. Theo entered quietly. "You okay?" "I expected it," she said. "I just didn't expect the country to care this much." He raised an eyebrow. "You think they care because he insulted you?" She shook her head. "No. They care because I didn't flinch." That night, the video of Trump's remarks hit every major news outlet. But instead of weakening her, it amplified her voice tenfold. Morning shows didn't just cover the attack, they contextualized it. CNN replayed footage of the original town hall. MSNBC cut together a montage of Trump's past comments to women of color in Congress. Even CBS, usually cautious, aired a segment titled "The Weaponization of Intimidation in American Politics." At her next appearance, a town hall in Atlanta, Jasmine was met, not with polite applause, but with standing room only. People packed into the venue 2 hours early. They weren't there to watch a performance. They were there to witness a reckoning. She walked out in a plain navy blazer, no notes, no teleprompter, and delivered one of the most watched grassroots speeches in modern political history. "I was threatened. I was mocked. I was told I'd regret speaking out. But here's the thing, what they call a threat, I call a mirror. If my voice makes you panic, maybe it's not my voice that's the problem. Maybe it's what it reveals about you." Cheers, chants, phones in the air, people crying, not because she sounded polished, but because she sounded like them. A woman in the front row shouted, "Tell it, sis." Jasmine smiled. "Oh, I will. And not just for me. For every woman who's been told to shut up, smile more, sit down, wait her turn. For every young activist who's been dismissed as too emotional, too angry, too much." She paused. Too much good? Maybe it's time. Too much became the baseline. By the next morning, that single line. Maybe it's time too much became the baseline was printed on t-shirts, posters, even painted in murals across cities. But Jasmine wasn't chasing popularity. She was chasing consequence. She held press briefings with law scholars about the constitutional dangers of political threats. She met with bipartisan ethics committees. She released a white paper titled "Silence Isn't Safety: Reframing Free Speech for the 21st Century." The Unmuted project doubled in size, then tripled. Chapters formed in unexpected places: small towns, farming communities, red counties. A chapter popped up in Wyoming, led by a retired Republican teacher who said, "I don't agree with all her views. But I've been punished for speaking out too, and I'm tired of being quiet." Even conservative commentators, some begrudgingly, started acknowledging what Jasmine represented. One op-ed in the Wall Street Journal read, "Whether you love her or loathe her, Congresswoman Crockett has reframed what courage looks like in the digital age." And the GOP's inability to handle her without resorting to threats says more about them than it does about her.